Good evening, good morning, change makers. Don't mind me, I probably thought I was in a time zone internationally. Nonetheless, I'm super excited to be on board again the March edition of the Social Impact webinar. Good morning to all our change makers. That is from Nigeria. That's Nigerian time. But if you're joining us from any part of the world, it may be evening at your time. So, nonetheless, I can still say good evening, good afternoon to you, change makers and social innovators tuned in this very day. I would say in French, bonjour. In Spanish will be bon dia. And of course, any other language. I don't want to begin to speak my native language or any African language at this time. But we are super excited to have all of our change makers tuned in to yet another beautiful edition of the Social Impact webinar. And this month's edition is in commemoration of the Women's History Month. And we have in the studio a very amazing speaker. She's from Ghana, and she is also quite experienced in the STEM sector. And she will be sharing with us on the topic DigitALL, Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality. We're looking forward to a very exciting learning experience, and it's going to be highly interactive and very conversational. Nonetheless, I would love to read from each of you. I would love to know where you're joining us from. So type in the comment section. Let us meet each of you. Let us know where you're joining us from, which part of the world you're tuned in. Just share in the comment section. Also share the organization you're representing. We're excited to read from you. All right. Thank you so much, Amar Mustafa. Hello, Amar Mustafa. Amar Mustafa is joining us all the way from Egypt. Thank you so much. We're super excited to have you. Thank you so much for tuning in this very day. I don't want to say morning because I know people are tuning to the Social Impact webinar from different time zones, and we're super elated about that. Okay, without further ado, I would move forward to, of course, have our quintessential speaker on board, and I want us to just meet her. So Akua Nyame-Mensah is a certified executive and leadership coach, L&D facilitator, speaker, opened up conversations, podcast host, and go here, Google, I am remarkable facilitator. As a former startup executive, she launched an online platform, Lamudi Ghana, for the first African-based technology unicorn Jumia Group. She now partners with multinational organizations and high-growth startups to design and implement leadership experiences and immersions virtually and in person worldwide. Akbar has had the opportunity to live and work in the US, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, and has consulted in and visited over 30 countries worldwide. In her work, she combines traditional coaching approaches with leadership psychology, neuroscience, emotional intelligence research, and spiritual modalities. Outside of her coaching and corporate speaking engagements, she is a regular mentor, coach, and judge for various entrepreneurship focused organizations, including Google for Startups, Allen's Academy, Founders Institute, Seed Stars, African Business Heroes, Fem Gems, and the Women's Impact Alliance, formerly the Coaching Fellowship. Akbar has a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania and the leadership focused MBA from the Africa Leadership University School of Business. Without further ado, we're super excited to have in the studio Akbar. Oh, thank you, Michael. Thank you for tuning in as well. Thank you, Aqua. We're super excited. Aqua is tuned in and she's joining us all the way from Ghana. Is it Aquaba? Or how do we want to welcome you?
I mean, Aquaba's fine. Hello, welcome. I
Aquaba's
respond
fine.
to all of them. Yes, doesn't have to be anything particular to Ghana.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. We're super excited to have you in the studio with us. Thank you, Michael Umosu. Thank you for joining us all the way from London. All right. So, without further ado, we'll move on to just having a very great interactive engagement with you, Aqua. So, starting off, I just want you to share your background in line with the theme for this webinar. So, starting off, let's just have a background, your an insight into your background as a STEM. Practitioner, and how has it been for you journeying in that sector as a female, and just again, not just journeying but also thriving excellently within that particular sector.
Well, thank you so much. I wouldn't say that I'm always thriving, but definitely trying my best to have as many opportunities to thrive as possible. So a bit about my background. My first degree is actually in city planning, so something that I would say is somewhat adjacent to the STEM sector. And then I also have an MBA, right? So I focus on leadership, and the work that I do, a lot of times I'm supporting women, I'm supporting individuals that are within the STEM sector. A lot of my work experience has also been in what I like to describe as the tech-enabled sector. So I had the opportunity to work for an online platform that leveraged a lot of technology in order to bring people more information so they can make better decisions. So I myself don't consider myself someone maybe who's a STEM professional, but I've always been very STEM adjacent and currently serve and support a lot of STEM professionals, especially women.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So that takes me to my next question. So we clearly see that women and girls are sort of not fully represented. I don't want to use the word underrepresented, but not fully represented in the STEM and tech sector. And in line with the theme for the commemoration of the Women's History Month, how can we supercharge an equitable digital future where we have a significant percentage of women and girls represented equally within the STEM and tech sector?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think that if through having conversations like this, asking ourselves these hard questions and, constantly engaging to make sure that we are bringing others along and we are being inclusive, where we're going to be able to have a more open, a more inclusive STEM sector. A lot of these ideas about what it takes to be successful within the STEM space, I think really tends to limit certain types of people, and not just people who identify as women, I think across the board. And so I think the first step is one, just getting really curious, having conversations like this, inviting people to really think about some of the opinions and beliefs they might have about people who do well in this space, and to recognize that a really great way to make sure that other people are open to these opportunities is just by giving it more exposure, right? So once again, I think conversations like this really do help. Within universities, even high schools, elementary schools, bringing in different types of individuals from different backgrounds and different genders to show that these people do exist and these options do exist. And I would say that actually, because of the internet and having access to the internet, more and more people can see that they can get involved in these things and that there are different ways to get involved as well. So I would say, first and foremost, having conversations like this. Secondly, if you're someone who's in charge of a space, making sure you're bringing in different types of people of all different spaces. And then lastly, if this is something that you're interested in, rather than saying to yourself or thinking to yourself, hey, I don't know anybody else who's doing this, or no one like me is doing this, try and find people online, build new networks, engage with people in different places. And I think the internet allows us to do that.
Beautiful. I love that very, I love your response to the question. And I love how you established that curiosity is, very essential, and also not just curiosity, but also providing those platforms through interactions and conversational platforms like what we're having currently, where people get to speak about these issues and also prefer, solutions as to how these can be visible. And I love how you're not just limiting it to this, but also moving forward to connecting with, like minds of such, across different platforms and social platforms digitally, as well as moving into institutions to educate young girls and women accordingly. So beautiful. So it takes me, this also delves into the next question. And I know that within this sector, there are biases, there are biases. You may even want to share some of the biases you may have, encountered, whilst trying to, you know, thrive, within the sector. So, how do we combat these biases, especially within the tech and STEM, for young females who intend to explore the sector, or who intend to start up a career within the sector? Because most times when people think STEM or think tech, they usually think it's really usually aligned with males other than females. But though that dynamic is changing greatly. But nonetheless, we will still we need to really answer that question as to how can we combat these biases, especially for young women and girls seeking the opportunity to explore, a career within STEM and tech.
Yeah. Once again, I think it's a really great question. This is something that I talk so much about within the work that I do with leaders. I think the first step is to recognize that we are all biased. I think that's the first thing. Like human beings, naturally, innately, we are biased. We have these beliefs, we have these opinions, and unfortunately, sometimes these beliefs and opinions can really limit us. And actually take away from our ability potentially to get things done or pursue careers we want to do, or have access to the resources we want to have access to. So I think the first step is just acknowledging, admitting for some that, hey, we are biased. And so that is, I think, step number one. And that's one of the first things that I always love to teach. Some people saying the word bias can actually, bring about great resistance. So you can call it stories we tend to tell ourselves, opinions, limiting beliefs, especially if bias is not something that resonates. But the first thing really is just recognizing, acknowledging we have biases. I think the second thing is to really just reflect on whether or not those biases are getting you closer or further away from the goals that you've set for yourself. So for example, if you're an organization and, the leaders, the individuals that are actually doing the hiring have this bias that men are better at specific roles, specifically more STEM roles, that's a bias that can impact your ability to find some of the best people for your organization, right? And so that is more of trying to, create policies, build in regulations and rules that make it so people have to think potentially outside that box that they put themselves in, right? So a bias, an opinion, a limiting belief, those are boxes. And the idea is, how can we get beyond those boxes? Sometimes it's through policies. Sometimes it's through bringing in other experts that can help to open your eyes to the fact that you have those policies and, you have those biases or opinions that might not be policies, but those biases and opinions are impacting your behavior and ultimately your results. So I think those are probably the first two things that everyone needs to consider, but really just recognizing that those biases aren't just from the people who are hiring or the organizations, but those biases could also be within those who identify as women, because maybe for them, they've never seen someone successfully been a software engineer, or they've never successfully seen someone who's done something within STEM. So just because you haven't seen it yourself personally, you don't know someone personally, that doesn't mean it's not possible. And so there could be a bias or limiting belief there within women or girls as well. And that's why, once again, opportunities like this, organizations like yours can do a great job to help open people's eyes to what is possible beyond maybe what someone's seeing in their day-to-day or beyond their existing network as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that response. I love how you are establishing the fact that biases exist.
They really do.
And it's not gender-based.
No, not at all.
It's not at all. So
it's based, in those. Yeah. And I just want to add, like, that's also something to consider as well, right? How we were raised, how we were conditioned, how we were socialized, all those have an impact also on what we believe we're capable of and what we want to focus on as well. And so sometimes it does take an individual really reflecting on how they were brought up and deciding as an adult whether or not that's something they want to continue with, right? Because that's what we can do as an adult, right? We can decide that, hey, I loved how I was raised. I really appreciate my parents. I love this environment and community, but this is something I really want to do and it's important to me, even if there aren't figures or models within the space I grew up in.
Beautiful. And I love how you again established the need for organizations to also put in place policies that also combat these biases, which is so super great. All right, so we know that the digital spaces can be unsafe, and with women facing, maybe much higher incidences of maybe online cyberbullying, and cyberbullying basically, and etc. How can technology be used as a fighting weapon to address gender-based violence? So cyberbullying, gender-based violence, etc. And how can technology be used to support gender equality?
Yeah. So this is not my area of expertise, but based on the little experience I have doing work online, because my work is primarily virtual. I spend 99% of my time working with clients, working with organizations virtually. So I've definitely seen how powerful technology can be to connect, to provide opportunities to learn, to give people the space to learn new skills and build new skills, because a lot of the work I do is also asynchronous, right? So we're all really busy. There's lots of different things that we're doing. So having access to learning opportunities and development opportunities that are not constantly live can be very, very, very impactful and very helpful, especially for very busy professionals. So in my sort of non-expert opinion, I think the first is really just to recognize that doing things online can be very beneficial, but there are definitely some drawbacks potentially. So I think a lot of it just has to do with educating yourself. If you are, a younger woman or a younger individual, hopefully you're within institutions that are teaching you, hopefully, how to do things online, and really just recognizing that all of us can support each other and really just focus on trying to be more constructive and trying to be more positive online. But it is really easy for things to go haywire, right? For people to use the online space, I think, in a more negative way. But I think, once again, it just starts with individuals recognizing and being very intentional of what they're doing online. So as I mentioned before, I do a lot of things online, but I try to be very intentional about how I use my time online. I use it primarily for work. I have some boundaries around it. But once again, I know that, I'm an adult, and because I use the online space for my work, there's a very specific way in which I show up. So I would just encourage everyone to just reflect about what they're doing online, why they are online, and if they have kids, giving them the opportunity also to set boundaries. And then once again, within institutions and organizations, encouraging their employees and teaching their employees the importance of cybersecurity as well. I recently actually did a program for a large FMCG, and one of the things that they were sharing was there's a lot of terrible things, unfortunately, that happen online, and lots of people within organizations are also targeted. So it's really important that people educate themselves and are thinking very critically about what they're engaging with online, how they're interacting online, and if they are going to share or comment, what's the intention behind it? And maybe just asking themselves, would I appreciate this, right? If I was to receive this, right? So really thinking about treating others how you want to be treated, I think, is a big part of it. But I think it does start with individual actions.
I love it. So I love how you're perfectly, highlighting that it really starts with individual actions and people being self-responsible, for their actions, because it is not machines that are behind, these contents online. It is human beings. And so if human beings can be more responsible, definitely we can engage equitably and fairly, on the internet. I love that. So I would want you, Akua, to just share with us your experience, your personal experience, working within the STEM sector, and how you've been able to thrive within this sector. In code, it's usually perceived as a male-dominated sector. And how have you thrived and, risen through the different ranks, and also to just, independently become, a consultant, and also, just thriving across this sector as a whole. Yes.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I consider myself more of a STEM adjacent sort of professional, especially in the beginning of my career. And when I think back to what that was like when I first started. So as I mentioned, earlier, or sort of what was described in my bio, I worked for a fast-growing startup, and I would say that primarily tech-enabled or tech startups do tend to be a little bit more gender focused. They do tend to be a little bit more male dominated, and I think that's probably still the case. We hear a lot of statistics about how even female-led organizations, female-led startups do tend to have a harder time raising funds. And so ultimately, right, the ones that tend to win out, or the ones we tend to hear about, do tend to be co-founded by men or primarily run by men. And so when I reflect back on the time when I had the opportunity to work for a fast-growing startup, I think a huge part was knowing myself. And this is something that I also teach as well. So just being really clear on, I'm going to probably sound like a bit of a broken record because I mentioned boundaries before, but I do think it's really important that you understand yourself, that you have some idea of what you're looking at of any opportunity that you're doing, because especially working within a fast-growing startup, there are so many moving parts. It's very easy potentially to be burnt out. And I think especially within the STEM sector, because they tend to be more fast-paced sectors, people who have other priorities or other interests outside of work, it can lead to an issue of balance. And so I think for me, one of the things that I always try to do, and at this point I didn't have a family, I still don't have a family, but that is definitely one of the things that I hear from the clients that I support within this sector, is really just recognizing that, a lot of times these types of organizations aren't always set up, don't always keep in mind that all employees are not 100% constantly on, are not willing and capable of working all the time. And that they do have lives outside of work. So that was just a long way of, I think, just bringing home this first point of understanding yourself, understanding what's important to you, being unapologetic about having boundaries, and really just recognizing that, there are many different types of organizations that do have different cultures, and that sometimes you might outgrow a culture, right? So one of the things I learned about myself was, as much as I enjoyed working within a fast-growing startup, being within a fast-growing startup means that you do have to compromise on certain things. You won't have potentially as much structure, right? It might be a bit more difficult for you to take time off, especially if you're the leader, because there's some things that maybe you have to be involved in. And so until that organization becomes more structured, you might need to be more involved. And I think, once again, specifically for those who identify as women, they might have other things they need to do outside of work, such as taking care of the home, especially if they don't have a partner that supports them with that, or they don't have the resources to have someone help them at home. Maybe they have a kid, those sorts of things make it a little bit more difficult. And then it becomes a choice between, do I want to work for this fast growing startup, or do I, need to be at home and have another type of job that gives me a little bit more flexibility? So that, I would say, is probably one of the things that's really worked to my advantage. Beyond the fact, like I mentioned before, I don't have a family. I also do think I have very strong boundaries. And so I ensure that I create time and space to eat, which might sound funny to some of you, but you'd be surprised the number of clients I have that forget to eat because they're so busy doing things, getting things done, trying to move the needle. So, making sure you have boundaries just to be a human being, and that you have the emotional, physical, and mental bandwidth to actually do this very innovative work, I think is really, really key, and something that is important if you want to be able to continue to be in the STEM sector. Because what I think, once again, we see a lot is people entering and then leaving because they realize, or they can't find something that works well for them and where they are currently in the season of life. So I think, cultivating the awareness piece, I think, has been very helpful for me. And now that I work for myself, it's even easier, right? Because I have a lot more control over where I spend my time and energy. But as I mentioned before, I work within, I work with a lot of organizations that are very fast paced. I work within organizations that are leveraging a lot of STEM. And so for a lot of times, this is what's coming up for them. Sort of this tension between sort of the expectations that society tends to have for women, or those who identify as women, and then sort of what males or men tend to be responsible for.
Great response. Yes. Thank you very much, Akua. Very, very brilliant response. I love how, number one, you emphasized the need for self-awareness, and being clear on your goals, and you moved on to really, really emphasize the essence of boundaries, because you can get consumed so easily, because it's fast-paced, and also, when you're very, very clear and distinctly, you have a distinct awareness of, why you're venturing into STEM in the first place. It guides how you intend to progress within it, so that at the end of the day, when you are dealt with pressure, you're not really seeking the first exit out of the door. And that's what you sort of mentioned also, that a lot of women also, maybe because they get into it, they discover how fast paced it is, and how intense that there can be intense pressure. They then decide to just exit, and they are quite unstable. Well, when you have a clear understanding and there's that self-awareness, you can always definitely ensure a balance. Thank you so much for that very brilliant response. I want to take a feedback from Michael. So Michael is one of our community members who is tuned in at this time, and is sharing that adopting and utilizing effective resources or means for overcoming limiting beliefs, biases, or mindsets is key towards achieving set goals. Yes, thank
Agreed.
you for confirming that, Michael. So thank you so much, Akua. So this takes me to my next question. And of course, whilst I would ask that question, I would also encourage everyone tuned in to share with us in the comment section any question you would like to ask our amiable guest speaker, and definitely we'll take on the questions. So I know that we're in the digital age, and there are a lot of innovations and tech solutions, out there. And when we're thinking about, okay, a lot of these innovations and tech solutions that have been discovered or bettered or created or in any way produced, a lot of them are maybe either run by men, or maybe they were produced or created by men. And then you then ask yourself, where are the opportunities for women in there in terms of ensuring that equitable gender involvement within the sector? So, and I know that when it comes to tech, there is the understanding of digital transformation and the power of digital transformation. So, in line with our understanding of gender equality, how can we, through the tool of digital transformation, drive gender equality within the sector?
Ooh. This is such a good question. Honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is just thinking about how the internet, I think, is such an amazing resource and such an amazing tool. I think that just having access to the internet, for those who are privileged enough to have it, right? Because I definitely think it's not something that everyone has access to, unfortunately. But I think having access to it, it's such a great tool, and it is in many ways a great equalizer, because it can open you up to new opportunities, new experiences, and most importantly, it can give you those learning experiences. So that's really the first thing that just comes to mind is, giving access or allowing more people to get online, I think will just expose people just organically to new ideas, new opportunities, and more technology first and foremost. So that's really the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing that comes to mind is, and this might be slightly controversial, but the second thing that comes to mind is just really reflecting on what type of spaces do you want to be in? And this might be, once again, a bit more of a privileged sort of perspective. But one of the things that I always thought about, especially as someone who's worked for high growth startups, is just asking myself, do I want to be here, right? If I recognize that this is a culture that isn't conducive, this is a culture where constantly my boundaries are being pushed, I'm constantly being asked to show up in a way that doesn't resonate with me. Do I really want to be here? And I think there are some individuals that say, hey, no, you should stay. You should try and advocate for yourself. You should, try to change that particular institution from within. And I think that's completely fine. But I tend to find myself as the individual who will go and do something on their own and start something for themselves. And that's ultimately what I did, right? I started my own coaching consulting practice. But I also realized that I do have a lot of privilege. I was able to save up a lot of money to be able to do that. So when I'm supporting my clients, and they do tend to be leaders and they do tend to be executive leaders, those are the types of conversations we have. How resilient can we be? And once again, this is, thinking about where people are within their career. This might not be something you can do at an entry level space. But if you are higher on your career, I think you can ask yourself those questions. Like, how much am I willing to take? How resilient do I need to be? And are there other places where I might be able to add a bit more, as opposed to having to ask myself, how do I fit in every single day? And it really sort of taking up a lot of brain space, a lot of energy. And then ultimately you aren't thriving. You are surviving, and maybe even barely surviving, because it's just not a good space to be in. And it's probably not a good space for any gender. It just so happens maybe that those who identify as male or are perceived as male can get away with a bit more.
Brilliant. I love that response. And I love again how you're really emphasizing the need to really be aware and understanding why,
Yeah.
why are you
Number
in the
one thing.
sector in the first place? Very, very
Yeah.
important. Really understanding that big why. And it's very, very essential. So thank you for emphasizing that fact. I want to take some questions from our community members, one of which is a question around how we can leverage innovation and technology for gender equality in the education sector. Yes.
Yeah. I think it's also going to depend on where you ask this question, because if you are an institution or organization, how you can leverage technology. I think that once again, there's lots of opportunities to expand the teachers' knowledge, expand teachers' thoughts about how to even engage with their students, that I think can be incredibly, incredibly impactful and really have a lasting effect on students. So there's that element, right? So institutions with teachers, training teachers to be able to be maybe a bit more flexible, really adapt to the different ways in which students learn. And I think that's really incredible. And I think that's really exciting if it's implemented at that level. When it comes to students, it's a bit more difficult to talk a bit about, because everyone has different levels of access to the internet or different levels of access to digital tools. But I also think that there's lots of options here. So for example, parents, maybe downloading specific types of software to help support students or their kids with, learning specific types of things. And once again, like this can really just, it's sort of a spectrum from being a child all the way up to now being an adult, right? There's lots of opportunities online just for learning, right? Even with what I do now, I take courses online, I do things online, which I think is really exciting. So I think it's just about being open to learning. And that, I would say is a skill to a certain extent, because there definitely are some individuals that feel like, once they get out of school, I know everything, I've learned it all. There's nothing more to learn. So I think a part of it's being open to learning, a part of it's being open to trying something new, because doing things online or doing things digital or using technology can feel a bit like outside your comfort zone if you've never done it before. So a lot of it, I think, is actually about cultivating a mindset. I think being able to truly take advantage of any of these technologies and truly take advantage of whatever you consider digital is having that growth mindset, having that mindset that, hey, it doesn't matter how old I am, it doesn't matter how much school I've had, there's always an opportunity to learn and do something new and different.
I love it. I love that response. And, just again, emphasizing the fact that exactly parents can help to support, by
Yes.
giving access to software applications, that could encourage innovation for the children. And this also applies to teachers as well, being able to adapt this new innovations and technologies to how they teach and impact knowledge to our children. So it's really just the ability to explore new opportunities, and there's just a whole lot that exists, digitally. So the next question is around how best we can make digital technology inclusive and accessible to persons with visual and hearing impairments, specifically women who strive to maybe join this digital era. So maybe female women who may be visually impaired or visually or having hearing impairments who want to leverage digital era. And the question is around how we can make digital technology inclusive and accessible to these persons. Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, when I saw this question, my first thought was, I'm not the expert in this. But I think once again, because I am a human being and I am around a lot of different individuals, I can, of course, just share my perspective on, what I think is important to consider when we are creating spaces that are more inclusive. And so I think the first step, and I might have alluded to this earlier, is just recognizing, number one, not everyone is just like us. I think one of the things that's been very interesting being in this, learning and development space for the last 5 years is really having to unlearn what I consider to be normal, right? I think it's so interesting to really just reflect on, like, what do we consider normal? Who decided what normal is? What does normal look like? And so I think, when it relates to this question and a lot of these questions that you're asking about how do we create more inclusive, more equitable, more open spaces, opportunities, it really starts with challenging, right, some of these biases we have around this idea of normal, or what's, this normalization of different ways in which we show up, and different ideas of what we should expect of others. And so I think just it's that mindset once again. I think that in order to create more inclusive opportunities, we just have to just remind ourselves that, hey, not everyone's like us, that we should be, developing things really on a spectrum, and really just recognizing that, hey, because, this works for me, it might not work for somebody else. So I think it is really a mindset shift. And a part of it might be also thinking about how can we regulate, how can we create policies that also potentially force people to keep that in mind as well, right? Because ultimately that's what policies do, right? They're forcing people to keep things in mind that they may not always keep in mind. But I do think also we can argue that a lot of, creating things that are more inclusive and more open could potentially also lead to more profit, more revenue as well. And so part of it might also be just reminding people that by creating things that aren't just for those who are normal, there might be some economic opportunities as well.
I love it. I love it. So really just being open-minded to the fact that there are a lot of existing opportunities when we decide to begin to question what we perceive as normal. And I love how you use that word of saying the ability to unlearn, really ability to unlearn what we perceive as normal. If we all can really just, embrace that mindset, we will be able to embrace, existing opportunities and also explore opportunities around us to prefer solutions to birthing inclusive digital technologies, that will provide accessibility to tech for persons like this. That's a great response. Thank you so much. So again, I would want to encourage everyone tuned in. Please type in the comment section your questions. We'll definitely be taking your questions the moment it drops. So what do you do in a place where the policy is that a woman cannot attain a certain position within a company? So, we're talking about gender equality now, and there is maybe some sort of biases as to maybe within that STEM company or STEM related organization, because the person is female, she cannot attain a certain position just because of her gender. What can the person do in that context?
Yeah. So when I saw this question, the first thing that came to mind was, and maybe you have a little bit more clarity on this, was there actually a written policy where this was the case? Like, so a written policy that actually, said, hey, something related to gender, or is this more of sort of an unspoken expectation?
So I think it's a case of there is probably a policy that exists, capping this opportunity, yes, for
very interesting
women within that organization, yes.
Wow. So, I mean, all of these things are definitely going to be very country specific, fortunately or unfortunately, right? Every single country has rules typically around rules, regulations, policies, laws that somewhat are related to this. So when I first saw this question, that's what actually came to mind. But whether or not there's rules, policies, related to, making sure that, women have equal access. I know even in places where technically on the books, women should have equal access, in practice within some of these organizations and institutions, there are unspoken rules, or there is a culture, there's a how that, typically leads to women maybe not getting access to additional opportunities. So, within, if there's, actual written rule, like I said, I think it's going to depend on the country. That actually might be illegal. So there may be some legal recourse, some legal proceedings that might potentially be taken if that's something, if that's something the individual is open to. But as I mentioned earlier on, I feel like there are, two basic ways to sort of look at these types of issues within organizations from my perspective. And once again, these are typically, I would say, these are, and there definitely are a lot more perspectives, but I'm going to sort of summarize it into two. And I would say that this is typically for people maybe who are within a higher level within an organization. So the first is really to ask yourself the question, do I want to be in a space where this is what's happening, right? This is sort of the culture. This is sort of what people allow and, accept to a certain extent. Do I want to be in a space like this, right? So asking yourself, do I want to be here? And, if you have the ability to do something else, maybe going to do something else, right? But if you ask yourself that question and you say, hey, no, I actually want to be part of the solution, maybe starting to ask yourself, who can I talk to? What are the powers that be? Is there a way to shift or change this? And how can you make sure that you build, bring on allies to help potentially combat this culture or combat this typical approach to, not promoting women within the organization. So that's initially sort of what came to mind when I saw this question. But I do think it definitely starts with, looking at the laws, what's, I don't, in most countries that I tend to work with clients, it's not legal to do that, right? It's, you can't give one gender access more than the other.
Okay, great. That's a very, very brilliant response. Thank you so much. I love how, again, you are emphasizing the need for these policies to be reviewed. And of course, how you are also highlighting the need for this person in question to also this person in question being upfront and probably just going to meet with persons or key decision makers within the organization, for the consideration of a review of such policies. So in the first place, you have emphasized the need of this person being able to just, again, sitting in with decision makers to really confirm or to really review these policies, So
if that's something they want to do, they're open to, they're willing to have that. I mean, for the lack of a better word, that fight,
All right, great,
yeah.
Great. I love it. I love that response. So I want to ask another question in relation to how, a lot of people, when they hear the word or the term gender equality and equity, you're thinking to yourself, how can we promote gender equality and equity within the STEM and tech sector? So there's a lot of questions around that, asking that, how can we promote gender equality and equity within the STEM and tech sector?
Yeah. I mean, I think, my answer is probably going to be very close to sort of what I responded to earlier. I think it starts with individuals recognizing that they have this bias. And it doesn't matter if you identify or are perceived as a man or a woman, ultimately all of us, and I mean, me as well, have a bias where we tend to, just accept that it's more likely that men will be in certain positions versus women. And so I think it starts with us challenging ourselves and opening up ourselves to having a different picture and seeing something different.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. So Akua, I would want you to share with us your final words in summary, if a charge around the theme for this session.
Yeah. So I would say there's three basic things, right, to really consider when we are thinking about creating a space where everyone has access to technology, everyone has the opportunity to be part of this innovation revolution. And I think that first step is, as individuals, really just recognizing that we can constantly be curious and we can constantly think about what is it that we want to do, right? That why piece. What is it that's important to us? Why do we want to be a part of this? And I think that through cultivating our self-awareness, it becomes so much easier for us to really advocate for ourselves first and foremost, and then also potentially remove ourselves from places that maybe are not the best, and I don't like to use the word fit, but that's what's coming to mind right now, that aren't the best fit for us, right? Not just doing it because we feel like we have to do it, but making sure that we really are finding opportunities that are aligned and engaging with people and, engaging within environments that are really places where we can add, right? We can add, we can innovate, and where we don't constantly feel like we have to be resilient, and where we constantly feel like we have to strive to get access to the same opportunities and the same resources. So I think that's really that second piece. Once you've become aware of what's important to you in your why, engaging, trying to figure out what feels good, what fits, and making sure that you're not staying someplace just because. I think the last element to keep in mind and to consider is really around that, expectation setting space. So setting expectations for yourself, setting boundaries for yourself, being clear about those boundaries with the right stakeholders, and making sure that, if you are within an organization, right, that's fast paced or that maybe doesn't have the typical approach to getting things done, that's something that, once again, you're willing to try. So I'm not saying don't try, but I'm also saying, you don't want to be burnt out. So really just making sure that you're setting expectations for yourself. You're also being very clear about the expectations that you set for others as well and what's important to you, and making sure you don't lose sight of that. And so I would say it's really those three elements: that self-awareness piece, that engagement piece, right? So be open to experimenting, but making sure that you're also setting expectations and boundaries. And I think even from the organizational or institutional space, it's pretty much those same three pieces as well. Organizations should constantly be curious about the policies that they've set, the reality on the ground. If an organization says that they value innovation and they do value, equity, is that present within the organization in terms of how they actually show up, and how their employees engage, right? Do the employees really reflect those interests of the organization and of the institution? And it's the same thing also with that engagement piece and that expectation setting piece. If an organization realizes, hey, maybe we aren't as inclusive as we want to be, what does that mean? What do we need to try? And how can we make sure that we set expectations and goals for ourselves so we're able to get closer to some of those values that we say that we live or we want to live, and that are important to us?
Brilliant. I love again how you're again emphasizing self-awareness, and and from self-awareness, understanding your big why, and moving on to understand your big why, and then also setting the right boundaries, which is very, very principal. So thank you so much, Akua. It's been a very insightful session. We're super, super elated to have had you on the social impact webinar. Thank you so much. You can also please share with us ways of how the audience can connect with you, of course. So let me have you speak to that before I continue.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think the best way to find me really is just on LinkedIn. You can just search my name. So that's AKUANM for my last name, and I'll pop up. But I spend most of my time on LinkedIn.
All right. Thank you so much, Akua, for your time. Just before our guest speaker gets off the studio, if you have any questions, as I had earlier noted, you can type in the comment section, and definitely we can take them. But if I don't see any question coming in just yet, definitely we can have our guest speaker exit. Thank you so much, Akua. We really had such a pleasure, such a very pleasant time with you, and we also had a very insightful webinar, just gleaning in from your wealth of experience and wisdom. Thank you so much, Akua. And yes, thank you so much. All right. To everyone, okay. All right, Aqua, it seems a question is coming. So let me just take it quickly. All right, so Michael just typed in the comment section now. So let me present it. Okay, so it says the phrase identifying as a woman or man indicates there is a gender choice to be made. If so, it could be another distraction or mental block from accomplishing goals. Oh, okay. I thought it was a question. It was actually a comment. All right, all right. Actually, I saw a question mark and I thought it was a question. All right, all right. But do you probably want to speak to it?
I mean, I don't. There's not really a question there. So I think there's just different ways of sort of talking about it, right? Because there's a sort of a perception piece versus identify piece. I think everyone sort of has their own thoughts about that.
Thank you so much, Aqua, once again. We're super excited and really grateful to you for spending your afternoon with us. And we look forward to many more opportunities to glean from your wealth of experience. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
All right. All right. To everyone, thank you for tuning in. It's been almost 1 hour of really listening into our guest speakers sharing from a wealth of experience and wisdom on the topic digital innovation and technology for gender equality. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. So I would also want to encourage everyone. We know a lot of our community members are tuned in at this time, and I would just want to really encourage you to take our time to go through our resources on our platform and also visit some of our online resources as well as accessing some of our courses. So one of which I would want to speak to, we just concluded the visioning retreat for social enterprises and NGO leaders. And I would really encourage you to lay hold of the yes, thank you so much, Michael. Lay hold of the replay. We have had numerous testimonials shared by our delegates and participants, and I would want to maybe take on a few just to let you in on the sort of experience you will be stepping into the moment you decide to access the replay. And one of which is the fact that we've had from David, who was one of our participants, sharing with us how just sitting in the room with DDK provided the inroad to just having a clearer vision and greater clarity about the next key steps for his organization. And in here it says he had been praying for clarity of his vision, strength from within him to pursue the vision and support, and also have support systems from without. And just stepping into the retreat really was an answer to those prayers. So thank you so much to everyone, and I really just encourage you to visit our platforms, visit the website, visit our IG page, which is Ideation of Africa, and you can just click on the link in bio to also access the retreat replay. You can also DM us if you have questions. If, for instance, you're seeking opportunities of how your organization or team members within your organization can explore, some of these courses as a group, and we'll be ready and willing to provide answers to this. Once again, thank you to everyone tuned in today. Thank you to Michael. Thank you to, I think I saw Amar and also Lamudi and many others who joined us today. Do enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we will look forward to seeing you at the April edition of the Social Impact webinar. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.